All right, so a part 2 of this Seventh-day Adventist German World War II collaboration has to be made, because that's just what Adventists did. They capitulated, they compromised, they're just weak. And people died because of what they did. And you're going to see it, you've seen it in the previous video, you're going to see it here again in this video. So this video is going to add additional information to highlight the utterly ungodly, shameful, broken moral compass of Seventh-day Adventists in Germany and America. After all, isn't the General Conference the leadership of the whole Seventh-day Adventist Church? Emphasis on leadership, or should I say lack of leadership, which is what I think we're going to see here. So I'm going to start with Seventh-day Adventists actually made an apology 20 years ago in their Advent Review magazine, where the German church, that is, made an apology for their shameful character, their ungodly behavior, etc., that they did during World War II. Let's look at that magazine right here. So they did this on October 13th of 2005. It's about 3 pages. We're going to look at select excerpts from each of these pages. But first, let me just say this. What do you call an apology that's made 60 years after the fact? Really? It took 60 years? 60 years for the Adventists in Germany to say, maybe we should apologize for what we did. No, not 1 year, not 5 years, not 10 years, not 20, 60 years to make an apology? Some apology, 60 years. Let's go back to the magazine. All right, so we got the broken moral compass of the Seventh-day Adventist Church who takes 60 years to do something. Here's what they first say. They tell us that this apology was first initially published in May of 2005 in the Advent Echo, which is a German magazine. So we can see it took from May to October to finally make it to this English magazine. I'm just going to show you some excerpts from the actual apology itself, and they're going to be encased in quote marks. Let's start with the first one here. We deeply regret that the character of the National Socialist dictatorship had not been realized in time and distinctly enough, and the ungodly nature of this ideology had not clearly been identified. You had this, as they say, National Socialist dictatorship. See, I don't think in German literature they're allowed to use the word Nazi. That's why I think you saw it here in brackets. So they put it here in the English. And some of you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't think you can do that in Germany. I think it's against the law. Seventh-day Adventists, you had this in front of your face and you could not recognize evil in front of you. And then you got to wait 60 years to tell us that, well, we couldn't even recognize evil if it's standing right in front of us. This is a deeply flawed moral character of a church, Seventh-day Adventist. But let's continue on here with the next quote. Then the church says it also regrets that in some of our publications that were found articles glorifying this German leader and agreeing with his ideology and Jewish discrimination in a way that, well, we couldn't even fathom today. So here you are again, Seventh-day Adventists. You're glorifying this German leader and his anti-Jewish rhetoric in your publications. Well, that's a great example of God's remnant church. Let's continue. Our peoples became associated with racial fanaticism, destroying the lives and freedom of 6 million Jews and representatives of minorities in all of Europe. Congratulations, Seventh-day Adventists. And that many Seventh-day Adventists did not share the need and the suffering, of Jewish citizens, because they went along with it. They persecuted them. Go on, let's read this next one. Oh, my word. And they deeply apologized because they excluded, separated, and left church members who were Jewish themselves, and they threw them out of their church. And they were what? Delivered to imprisonment, exile, or death? Death? Here we are 60 years later saying, we're sorry we killed you. We sent you to your death. Sorry. Wow. Do you see the character of this church? I sure do. It shines through brightly here. Oh, we're sorry that you died. But let's go back to the magazine and read this one here. And an Adventist congregation expelled members of the Jewish heritage, and they went to die. Then they say one, Max Israel Monk, Look at that name Israel, by the way. I'm going to highlight that later, why he is called Max Israel Monk. He was ejected by the Seventh-day Adventists, sent to a concentration camp, but he survived, unlike others that they sent who died. And his is the graphic you see in the middle of the page. And here it is here, Max Israel Monk. Remember what I said about Israel? That's really not his name, but I'll tell you why that's included in there. Then they say, we not only kept silent, but we also published things we never should have published. We published anti-Semitic ideas from our perspective, which really weren't needed. Okay, so we got the anti-Jewish, discriminating Seventh-day Adventist church. No, wonderful. Now, I like this. Are you ready for the excuse? We're going to get the big grant. We now move from apology to making excuses. We had to realize that one wrong statement, one wrong move by a person meant he could end up in a concentration camp. That was the reason why we excluded and disfellowshipped Jewish-born Adventists from our midst. If a local church had not done this, the Nazis, well, they would have closed the church, taken the elder to prison, and it would have meant the whole church would have been forbidden. That's not an apology. This is an excuse. And they're saying, well, if we didn't act right, we could have been sent to a camp ourselves. So we're going to follow what the government said, and we're going to expel Jews from our midst because, well, we don't want to go to concentration camp. We don't want to either go to camp and be in prison and perhaps die. Now, let me just say this. There are some Seventh-day Adventists and go, well, what would you do? They're going to be pointing at me. What would you do if you were faced with death? Well, I was faced with it all the time. Behind me is my beret. I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne. Here's something that I learned when I was in the 82nd Airborne. The acceptable casualty rate for a combat drop was 50%. That was my life. I signed up for the fact that if I jumped out of that airplane, I had, at worst, probably a 50% chance being killed in the air, or I had a 50% chance of actually being on the ground and then facing more. I have faced it. I lived it. There are thousands who are facing it and living it today and have for many years. So I don't want to hear anything from you trying to point to me and saying, well, you never, I faced it. I lived it. And I would do it again, too. And matter of fact, there were 82nd Airborne paratroopers who were freeing people from concentration camps. I went and looked at the pictures at the 82nd Airborne Museum. My predecessors, let me say it like that, were willing to free people that you Seventh-day Adventists sent to those concentration camps. What a horrible religion Adventism is. Let's continue reading here. Adventists who helped Jews during the war led to the discovery of those who acted less honorably. So now we got kind of a half excuse. They say, well, you know, there were some Adventists who actually did some good things. So let me pause here. Yes, there were. But here was the problem. When a member of your church was acting contrary to the wishes, laws, etc. of this World War II socialist regime, the whole church was going to get stained by that one member. So here's what happened amongst the Mormons and the Seventh-day Adventists. When they had members doing these kind of things, the leaders would come down on them and say, stop it. Because if you continue to do this, we're all done. So the fact that this magazine wants to point out, well, some Adventists did some great things, are not telling us the whole story. I don't doubt that there were. I'm sure that there were. As there were Mormons who did the right thing. But their leadership came down on them and said, stop it. But Adventists won't tell us that, will they? Look here. You know what I didn't see in this apology? You Seventh-day Adventists sent these Reformed Seventh-day Adventists to concentration camps. When the Gestapo came and were going to investigate you, you pointed the finger at the Reformed Seventh-day Adventists and said, go look at them. And they did, and they went to camps. And while I don't have any statistics for how many died and how many survived, it's hard for me to believe that 100% of them lived in the concentration camps. I'm sure some got out, and I'm pretty sure some died. As I said in the first video, I say again in this video, Seventh-day Adventism, you got blood on your hands. You are a murderous, evil religion. All right? There's no other way to say it. This apology that I saw, it's late. 60 years. It's weak, and it's not comprehensive. They're not apologizing for everything. Nothing. So let me say it like this, Seventh-day Adventist. The Seventh-day Adventist German Church has no apology to the Reformed Church that was around them in Germany that they sent to their deaths. Too bad, so sad for you. We'll just apologize to these other people. Not comprehensive. Now, worst apology from the General Conference. General Conference, what's your role? Aren't you the leadership of the worldwide church? Aren't you the leaders of Adventists in South America, Australia, Europe, North America, Europe, Germany, World War II? Or you just sit back in Maryland and go, no, we don't see anything, we don't hear anything, don't say anything. No, you're the leaders. You knew what was going on. You know why? We have the benefit of history. We're going to look at some historical events of this evil regime. Remember the silence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in America while all this history is taking place. Where's the General Conference coming out against it or for it? Or their silence, which is their tacit acceptance of it. So let's begin here. History starts here in the mid-1920s when this leader issued his Mein Kampf book. 2 volumes. First one in 1925, second one in 1927. I got a little excerpt here for you in the middle of the screen that I'm really not going to bother to read too much, but it's enough of a history to tell us of the Jewish discrimination that this person had, and it starts in the mid to kind of late 1920s. It's not hidden, it's written. Just read his book. So we go from 27. Here we are, and I used the Holocaust Encyclopedia, the Holocaust Museum from the United States, which you should go visit. It's so depressing. I went there many years ago and I went through it, and when I came out of it, I just felt depressed because it's horrible what you see. So I'm going to use their timeline. 1933, he's appointed Chancellor of Germany. Then we have the Reichstag fire, which basically is him starting to violently take over the government. I didn't realize that the first camp was established within 2 months of this clown being appointed leader. 2 months. We got Dachau started. Look at 1933, an anti-Jewish boycott by this German government. I got to say that again because you're going to see something on this later. An anti-Jewish discrimination starting April 1st, 1933. You see at the bottom of the page. Here is another article on it showing something from March targeting Jews. And here are German soldiers with signs, and if you look closely, they're in English and they're in German. Original photograph from 1933. There it is, English and German, and they start the discrimination of the Jews and their business. Let's go to 1933. We got laws limiting Jews in public schools. Sorry, you're done. He's starting to burn books that, well, were very un-German. Then there's laws for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases. Forced sterilizations, I guess is another way to say that. Then we have the editor's law. You can't work in journalism if you're not an Aryan. April 1935, Jehovah's Witnesses are banned. Nuremberg, race laws. A new wave of anti-Semitic legislation brings immediate and concrete segregation of the Jews. Do you get a little bit of a theme here now about this German government and its so-called love for the nation of Israel? All right, clearly discriminatory. Now, this is just a brief summary of the historical events that start really from the production of this guy's book in 1925, second volume in 1927, all the way up to 1935. Adventists, you had the Adventists back then, General Conference, you had the same access to the news, and even more events that I didn't put in this video, that we just saw. So what did Adventists do? I know what they did. They promoted with a tour. What you see here is a magazine article. I chose the Morning Oregonian. This article that you see here in the middle of the page, I'm going to blow it up and we're going to look at it in sections, was all over almost every newspaper across the nation at about this time. I just happened to choose this one, but it's by no means an exception. This thing was all over the place. So let's look at it here. Here's the headline. Frau Hulda Jost defends Hitler. Well, who is this Hitler defending Frau Hulda Jost? She's a Seventh-day Adventist who lives in Berlin. So here we are in 1936 with a Seventh-day Adventist, you're going to see nurse, who lives in Berlin, who's coming to America on a tour to defend this German ruler. Congratulations, Seventh-day Adventist. You show your true character. Then what it says here is, when she's doing this, She's taking queries and answers, and she has translators with her. And a lot of these have to do with the persecution of the Jews. And she's answering, German Jews have lost only their leadership and sentiment in their country, being that Germans should only be led by Germans. That was a really soft answer of hers to answer for the persecution of the Jews. But it's going to happen again later in this article. Let's continue reading the article. And at the very top here is communism. So she's asked, then Jews are discriminated against only because they're Jews? And what's her answer? No, she returned. Communism played a large part in that turbulence. Communism? We just saw that 1933, those German soldiers boycotting the Jewish stores by the German government. Not the communists, it's the German government. And then she goes on to say, and I love it, she calls him by his proper name. He's the one influence that lifted Germany out of the dumps and made it a self-respecting country. She judged an overwhelming majority of the populace, was unqualified in favor of this regime, and they wanted to endure, including Seventh-day Adventists. She's over here promoting this. By the way, all this is taking place in America by someone the Americans know who was a Seventh-day Adventist German nurse. And then what does she do on her tour? Frau Jost is en route to the International Convention of Seventh-day Adventists scheduled to be held in San Francisco the later part of May. She's going to the GC conference to talk about and defend, as we saw in this front of this article, her defense of Hitler. And then this last part here is, well, this is how we know who she is. So she works. She said, Adventists in their welfare work take no regard of faith. Not true. You saw in the first video, Adventists were forbidden to help Jews, homosexuals, political prisoners, etc. They were only allowed to help Aryans. They tell us here who she was. Frau Jost was a nurse in the German Navy, and during the war, what they mean by that, because we didn't have World War II at this time, it's 1936, so the war is often called the Great War, what we call World War I today. And the last section of red text, there's a lot of talk about Germany yearning for war. That's rot, she says. German people want peace. And this guy here, Der F., himself desires peace. Boy, how did that work out for the world? What a great spokesman she turned out to be. Now, so this is April of 1936. What happens right after April of 1936? How about June? 2 months later, we got the formation of the Center for Research of Racial Hygiene. Eugenics. Another concentration camp opens in July of 37. Anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish exhibitions opened in Munich in 1937. Now we got to hear, remember what I said earlier? Remember why we saw the name Israel on that German Seventh-day Adventist? This law of alteration of family and personal names. Read with me here. A new law requires Jews bearing first names of non-Jewish origin to adopt an additional name, Israel, for men and Sarah for women. That's why we saw the word Israel inserted in the middle of his name, because he had to do that according to this law. Then German Jews, their passports are declined, and then we had this November 9th, 1938 event, which I remember from history, where Jews were killed. Their homes were ravaged, their stores were ravaged, and Jews were killed. And where's the Seventh-day Adventists at, by the way, saying, oh, finally, we're not for this? Silence. 1938. Exclude the Jews from economic life. They backdated an order authorizing euthanasia. People with disabilities, mental disorders, etc., and did that. And we see here in May of 1940, another camp is established. And remember that purple triangle behind me has the actual stamp from that camp on it behind me hanging on the wall. Because Jews, well, they had to wear a badge, and so did many others. And like the Jehovah's Witnesses wore purple triangles because they were trouble for this regime. And as I said in the first video, there's a reason why you Seventh-day Adventists don't have a triangle like the Jehovah's Witnesses, because you weren't a problem. You actually went along with them. October 15, 1941, middle of the page, deportations, Austrian and Czech and German Jews. October of 1941, this SS officer submits a report on the mass killing of Jewish civilians in the northwest region of the Soviet Union. And where is Adventism on this? Silent. Silent. They accept it. Here's another way to look at this historical event. Nothing happened in German World War II history that made that, all this stuff we just looked at, that made the Seventh-day Adventists come out and say, whoa, 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 stop, full stop. We're not in for this. That did not happen. It did happen with the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm not going to go too far off track with them to say what they did, but they weren't exactly totally clean themselves. But there did come a time in which they said, full stop, we're not supporting this regime. And they took the brunt of it, right? There it is from Auschwitz, right there. Adventists? Nah, they didn't do that. Matter of fact, it took Adventists 60 years for an apology. 60 years. An apology that makes excuses for their German discrimination. Well, if we didn't do this, this is what would happen to us. Yeah, no kidding. There are consequences in life, and I understand the consequences aren't so easy sometimes, and they're very hard. But this was a particular horrible part of world history, and consequences were swift and often severe. And many people did endure those consequences and died in those camps, and did that. But no, not the Seventh-day Adventists. Oh, I don't know. We're a big brave Sunday, looking out for the Sunday law, and Miss Hitler, but they're looking out for the Sunday law. Wonderful. The American General Conference leadership took no leadership during this whole phase. And the responsibility for what happened there lies on you too. You're supposed to be leaders. Act like it. Leadership is not laissez-faire leadership. Laissez-faire leadership, as I teach in my business courses, is a leadership of completely hands-off leadership. As a matter of fact, no leadership at all. You just let the people run themselves. That's laissez-faire leadership, often regarded in all the textbooks as a horrible leadership model to emulate. And it certainly looks like Seventh-day Adventists are absent leadership in doing that. So this full evil and murderous character of Adventism, yet again, in this video, is on full display. So Seventh-day Adventists, I say to you, yet again, it's time for you to get out of this evil, ungodly, and, well, frankly, un-Christian religion. You need to come to the real Jesus of the Bible, renounce and repent of this false, fake, Levitical priest Jesus of Adventism, and come to the true Christ.